Monitors say rebels in eastern Ghouta have surrendered heavy arms. This after Russia announced the Syrian government is now in full control of the town of Douma. Washington, meanwhile, reiterates that all options are on the table in response to that suspected chemical attack in Syria, but says it hasn't decided about military strikes. And the investigation continues in Algeria a day after the country's worst ever air disaster killed 257 people. A military plane crashed shortly after takeoff. Algeria is observing 3 days of national mourning. Hello and welcome. You tuned in to France 24. I'm Rochelle Ferguson-Biahi with the main world headlines. Russia's defence ministry says the Syrian government has taken full control of the town of Douma, the scene of last week's suspected chemical attack. According to Moscow, the Syrian regime flag is now flying high in Douma, and Russia's military police have been patrolling the streets. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights has confirmed the news. Syria's government, though, has yet to officially comment on the development. Well, earlier I spoke to our regional correspondent Leila Morena Allen in Beirut. I asked her about the message that Russia is wanting to send.
So this is the idea here. They're saying they will be there to guarantee law and order. Now, they've extended an invitation for weapons inspectors to come in and see that there was no chemical attack. That will take quite a long time to organise if that's going to happen. But for now, it's clear that this is a show of force, that the Russians are here to support the Syrians. They're in the town. They've taken control again. Now, we know that there were, 7 weeks ago, there were around 200,000 people still living in Douma. We think that about 130,000 have left over the last month during these new and intense attacks. But there are still tens of thousands of people there, and we don't know how many are militants and how many are civilians. So while this announcement has been made that they're now fully in control, we don't actually know how many rebels are still left in Douma.
Right, well, let's stay with Syria. Omar Ahmadi is a senior fellow at the Centre for Syrian Studies at the University of St Andrews. We can speak to him now. Mr. Ahmadi, thanks for speaking to France 24. I mean, first of all, what's the strategic interest of the town of Douma?
Well, of course, it's proximity to Damascus, I would say, primarily, and there's a lot of symbolic, of course, significance as well. And I think, you know, what's quite ironic is all this talk about victory. And it's almost like an illusion over another illusion. You know, the first illusion is that this is a military conflict, that what began in 2011 was in essence a military conflict, when it was not that at all. So when you declare victory, who are you declaring victory over? The rebels? But what about the population of Douma? The population of Douma that went out in protest in 2011, and now 7 years later, it's the same population that initially had grievances that were political and economic, but now has seen its own government bombard its town. So did you win over these people? See, these are the subtle aspects of such a declaration of victory that seem to be ignored.
I mean, with the latest news coming in today of the Syrian government apparently now being in control of the town of Douma, are there concerns that maybe evidence, maybe proof of that suspected chemical attack that sparked outrage could disappear?
Well, of course. I mean, they are expected to disappear. And not only is the evidence expected to disappear, we're talking about in each, you know, every type of scenario that gets repeated, large displacements of the indigenous population, often under UN cover. You know, it's quite ironic. So you take over a town, not only the rebels are displaced or sent out to Idlib, but their families, the families of their families, at times, you know, entire neighborhoods are sent out north. You know, we're seeing a dramatic reconfiguration of the demography of Syria, and it doesn't seem to raise any alarms.
I mean, when it comes to diplomacy, Mr. Ahmadi, we've heard the United States talking about all options being on the table, that being followed in, you know, some respects by France and the UK, who are sitting up and taking notice. Are the West acting accordingly as far as you're concerned? I mean, could they be doing more? Should they be doing less?
Well, the situation from the very beginning required either full-fledged diplomacy, which the West did not engage in, because this was never about just Syria as far as Russia is concerned. This was about the Ukraine, it was about NATO expansion, it was about missile defense, and the West was not willing to truly negotiate, neither under Obama nor under Trump, with the Russians on these issues. So diplomacy as such was not fully experienced or engaged in. And then as far as military measures, we've seen last April what this amounts to. You can quote unquote discipline the Syrian regime, but it will not. It doesn't lend itself to disciplinary measures. It will repeat the very actions you wanted it to stop, almost arrogantly and adamantly. So. We're in a situation where one party, that is the Syrian regime and its allies, are willing to do anything and everything to achieve their objectives. And then we have the West, which is always reluctant diplomatically and reluctant as well when it comes to military measures.
Omar Ahmadi speaking to us from London. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, with Russia confirming that the town of Douma is back in the hand of the Syrian regime, the move marks a significant blow for rebels. Nadia Massi looks back on the town, which has been under siege since 2013.
Back in 2011, before Syria's conflict became the complex civil war it is today, it was a revolution against a brutal authoritarian government. Then, one of the centres of revolutionary power was eastern Ghouta, in the Damascus countryside, a stone's throw from the capital. It was here that the political opposition trialled running local councils, preparation for what they saw as their government in waiting once Assad had been ousted. But instead of losing power, the president strengthened his grip and closed in on opposition strongholds like Ghouta. His regime sealed the area's borders, stopping food and medicine getting in and people getting out. Those siege tactics proved effective in Homs and Aleppo, the other two key opposition strongholds. But despite the relentless siege and the deadly 2013 chemical attack, Ghouta remained stubbornly in rebel hands. In the past 2 years, though, Assad has steadily won back more of the country and redoubled his attention on the only pocket of rebel territory still able to fire missiles into the capital. So this February came a massive assault backed by Russian air power. Monitors say as many as 500 civilians a week were killed. Rebels in the towns of Harasta and Arbin relented and signed evacuation deals with the government. Until last week, only the town of Douma remained outside regime control. Negotiations were reportedly underway to secure a ceasefire there, but then another apparent chemical attack finalized its fate. With dozens killed and hundreds wounded, Jaish al-Islam rebels hastily signed evacuation papers and were bussed to the northern province of Idlib. On Thursday morning, 7 years after the opposition bastion was established, Russia says the Syrian regime is back in control of eastern Ghouta.
Now, the Speaker of the US House of Representatives, Paul Ryan, has announced he won't be running for re-election this year. It's no secret the 48-year-old Republican never wanted to be House Speaker, but the news signals nonetheless a big blow for Republicans ahead of midterm elections in November. With a record number of resignations and retirements, the party could face an uphill battle at the polls. Alison Sargent explains.
Mr. Speaker, will you miss it? Hey, guys, you'll see me in a minute at the press conference.
It was with a small smile on his face that Paul Ryan announced he's calling it quits. The Republican House Speaker will not be running for re-election in November. He says he wants to spend more time with his wife and teenage children.
To be clear, I am not resigning. I intend to full my served term as I was elected to do. But I will be retiring in January, leaving this majority in good hands with what I believe is a very bright future.
The conservative representative from Wisconsin was thrust into the spotlight in 2012 when Republican candidate Mitt Romney chose him as a running mate.
Ryan, there we go. All right.
In October of 2015, Ryan reluctantly became Speaker of the House, steering the fractured Republicans through the end of the Obama years and the tumultuous Trump administration. While Trump and Ryan have had a strained relationship, together the two men achieved one of Ryan's career-long goals, overhauling the tax code.
Speaker Paul Ryan is a truly good man, and while he will not be seeking re-election, he will leave a legacy of achievement that nobody can question. We are with you, Paul.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Some analysts say Ryan's departure doesn't bode well for the ruling party's prospects in November's midterm elections. Ryan is one of over 40 Republican congressmen who have announced that they won't be seeking re-election. While Republicans battle over who could succeed Ryan, across the aisle, his retirement is just one more reason to hope that the next Speaker of the House will be a Democrat.
Algerian officials have declared 3 days of national mourning following the North African nation's worst ever air disaster. On Wednesday, a military plane crashed shortly after takeoff near the capital, Algiers, killing 257 people. Well, the cause of the crash is still unknown, but authorities have opened an investigation. Alison Sargent explains.
Combing through the wreckage of the deadliest plane crash in Algeria's history. The aircraft was largely consumed by flames after it crashed into a field soon after takeoff. Eyewitnesses were some of the first to arrive on the scene.
The plane took off from the base and caught fire. I think the pilot wanted to avoid hitting houses. He steered into the field.
When we got to where the plane crashed, we found piles of bodies. It's a disaster, an absolute disaster. I don't want to talk about it.
The plane took off from the military base of Boufarik, just south of the capital, Algiers. It was supposed to head south, stopping in Bashar before ending its journey in Tindouf, near the border with Western Sahara, a disputed territory annexed by Morocco. The Algerian-backed Polisario Front, a group seeking independence for Western Sahara, said that over 24 refugees from the region were among the dead, including women and children. The rest of the victims were Algerian soldiers and their families. Algerian authorities are investigating what might have caused the crash. The aircraft is a Soviet-designed Ilyushin 76 model with an overall good safety record. But the Algerian military has a history of aviation disasters. In 2014, 77 people died when an aircraft carrying army personnel and their family members crashed in the mountainous region of al-Bouaghi. And 2 years earlier, 2 army planes collided in mid-flight during a training exercise, killing both pilots.
A former top Chinese Communist Party official who was once tipped for a leadership post has pleaded guilty at his bribery trial. Sun Zhongchai, a former Politburo member, stands accused of taking advantage of his position to seek profits for others and illegally accepting a large amount of money and goods. Yulia Skripal, daughter of the ex-Russian spy Sergei Skripal, has rejected an offer of help from the Russian embassy days after she was discharged from hospital where she was treated for poisoning. Yulia and her father were victims of a nerve agent attack last month in the English town of Salisbury. The UK has pointed the finger at Russia over the incident, something which Moscow denies. Solange Mougin has the details.
Just 2 days after being released from this Salisbury hospital, where her father, a former Russian-turned-British spy, is still being treated for poisoning, Yulia Skripal wanted to make some things clear to Moscow. The 33-year-old, who was also poisoned March 4th in the UK by a nerve agent that British and Western nations blame on Russia, released a statement through the British police force.
I have access to friends and family. I have been made aware of my specific contacts at the Russian embassy. At the moment, I do not wish to avail myself of their services, but if I change my mind, I know how to contact them.
A thank you but no thank you that the Russian embassy in London questioned.
We continue to insist on a meeting with Yulia and Sergei Skripal. The situation around them looks more and more like a forceful detention or imprisonment.
The back and forth over her refusal to speak to Russian officials is just the tip of the iceberg. The Skripal poisoning has created the most fraught diplomatic incident between Russia and many Western nations since the Cold War. The British press is now wondering what will become of the Skripals and if they'll be given new identities, or if they'll testify in the investigation. Yulia Skripal also addressed a controversy involving her cousin Victoria. She's been making the rounds on Russian media. Skripal asked not to be contacted by her cousin in the statement, for she said she's a pawn of Vladimir Putin's, in a Kremlin-led media battle to alter the narrative in the Skripal poisoning.
You are up to date. More international headlines in 15 minutes' time here on France 24.